The story of Beyond a Dia. Mostly. Everything you need to know in order to jump into our live show or mid-campaign. Or, alternatively, if you just need a refresh on the story because there's a lot going on. Spoiler alert! Beyond a Dia takes place 30 years after the original campaign wraps up. The Lord of Cinders has been defeated, the Mystic Shard has been shattered, and the Illithids were defeated in the Battle of the Gnome Lands. Zack disappeared with the rest of the clowns, Nicholas cozied up at a library, Sandra went back home and opened a vineyard, Dante married Sandra, and Demare was subsequently executed for all of her various crimes. 30 years have now passed, and we have a whole new party. Relic Medei, magic student and nephew of Zack Medei. Virgil, the half-drow, hailing from the Hollow. Duskin, the knife-wielding faun who likes to wander off a lot. Matthew, the cleric, who only speaks in monotone and has no soul. No, I mean, like, literally, he has no soul. You can't use revival magic on him. He just dies. And Amelia, another wizard, who is desperately looking for her lost spell books. She's an Eladrin, which is like an elven inhabitant of the Feywild. You can look this up. They're all paired together as a party by the newly reformed Adventure Guild. The Adventure Guild is back in this campaign after they were destroyed in Campaign 1, and they are now under new leadership, namely Gunthorian. This man is a full-on god. Men write love letters to him, and women name their unspeakable toys after him. Aiding him is an older goblin named Sylar, a veteran of the Battle of the Gnome Lands, as a matter of fact. He speaks with a Scottish accent. Their current operations have them in Eingera, homeland of the Fae, because they're having a lot of problems over there with corruption, this enormous cult, and other various monsters that need to be fought. Naturally, it's time to crash another airship, filled to the brim with explosives, directly into one of their fortresses. After the first battle of the campaign, the floor becomes unstable and the party falls down very, 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 very far into the abyss. And then the airship explodes and leaves them stranded down there, along with the NPC Adeline, another mage who kind of temporarily joins the party. They make their way through the underground library carved in stone, which is written in an ancient form of Undercommon. Basically, it's like reading the Shakespeare equivalent of Undercommon, giving the party some insight and vague details on 3 crystals, a tower, and an ancient legend. Inspiring campaign setup stuff. Finding the exit, they make their way up the longest staircase in the universe, directly into what used to be the lair of the Lord of Cinders. Not much here now except a giant pile of bones, a few scattered coins, a giant pile of electrum, several signs of battle, an old cannon, and Sandra's old bone dagger, which the party does grab several of these things, before making their way out of the cave and back down the mountain to a nearby outpost. The party decided to camp out here overnight, but sent a message back to the guild via Harpy, because Harpies deliver mail in this universe. The next day, they were picked up via airship and given a new quest. Find the crystals mentioned in this ancient library that the party discovered, because if the cult was building atop this library, there must be a connection. So the party is given a Swiftsure-class sky skiff and sent to Adia, specifically Riverside, where they were instructed to meet up with Old Man Hickory, an old man named Hickory. Now, Hickory appeared in Campaign 1 when the party briefly encountered him living under a rock. He turned out to be an extremely powerful artificer. It also turns out that him being crazy is just a cover story because he actually used to work for Lord Grendelmore. Now, this guy was extremely bad news. He ruled over the human populace with an iron fist, declared war on the dwarf holds, lost, and subsequently disappeared, dead or otherwise. But not before 4 people with abnormally long lifespans managed to defect. Gunthorian was the first. He managed to escape his troubled past by becoming a paladin. Old Man Hickory became the crazy guy in Riverside, and a third person, a dwarf, has gone underground. At this point in the story, we don't know who the fourth person is, and we don't even know their name. But the important thing is, 3 of these 4 have a set of keys. Now, they need all 3 of these keys in order to open the vault back in Castle Grendelmore, where they will subsequently find another key to the Frozen Citadel, where the crystal resides. Old Man Hickory has the first key and does hand it over to the party, but not before he drops a few surprise details on Adeline, namely that she is actually from a noble family and her father is a very prominent member of the slave trade. The party confronts Adeline on this, and she explains that that is the reason she ran away from home. Now, initially, Gunthorian ordered the party to take Adeline home because her father is a major investor in the Adventure Guild. But now the party figures, maybe we go to Wizard City instead while we mull this over. So they go to Wizard City instead while they mull this over, which is a place that's very self-explanatory. It's a city of wizards, and you have to be some form of magic caster in order to get in. Wizards only. Keep it tight. We pick up a few supplies there until the party decides to curveball the DM, who is totally unprepared for their decision to go straight to Shurthor and return Sandra's dagger. Now, there were always plans to do this, but I figured they would do it much later in the campaign, but here we are now. The group returns the dagger, and Sandra is extremely thankful, so the party gets a bunch of autographs. Duskin gets to meet the actual goddess Cassandra, who is actually Sandra's mom, which was revealed in the finale of the first campaign. So she's still hanging around. The party also receives a pearl worth 100 gold, allowing them to cast Identify on all the magical items that they pick up. But the most important thing was Relic's crystal. See, while the party was in the former lair of the Lord of Cinders, Relic picked up a large orange glowing crystal and basically glued it to the end of his staff. This crystal was more or less in the center of what remained, which was a giant pile of bones, and he then proceeded to lick it a bunch of times. Turns out this is a draconic shard. Canonically, it tastes like a Switch cartridge. It also contains the spirit and essence of the Lord of Cinders, who promptly reveals himself in spirit form in front of Relic and Sandra's sister, Gale. Gale spent a great deal of time with the Lord of Cinders before she was rescued by Sandra in the original campaign, so she was very easily able to detect and sniff out this magical source. The Lord of Cinders, or Sindar as his name actually is, proposes a deal to Relic, which he will learn more details on later in the campaign. In the meantime, all he has to do is not throw away the crystal and don't tell Sandra, because she will hunt him to the ends of the earth in order to destroy this crystal. But also importantly, Sandra manages to point the party in the right direction when it comes to the dwarf that went underground after the war. The party learns details of an underground train, one that goes around and around and never stops, despite the fact that the dwarven subrails were supposedly destroyed at the end of the first campaign. The party heads to Iron Ridge, which is basically the capital of the dwarves, which is dug into this giant ravine and has little trolleys going around. Breaking into an old subrail station, the party is quickly confronted with what can only be described as the dwarven mob. The party is attacked, wins, and sneaks aboard a dwarven supply train, heading to this train that goes round and round and never stops. At which point, the party enters the story arc I like to call Stonepiercer. The idea of this dungeon, the train dungeon, was for them to fight their way to the front, but instead they managed to deception their way to the front of the train, effectively skipping about 5 cars, but not so fast. Mr. Stonecutter, the man running this train, is keen to their deceptive tricks. and he's quickly able to dispel the illusion magic for everyone in the party. With everybody's secrets out in the open, Mr. Stonecutter cuts the party a deal. If they get the golden railway spike for him, he will give them the key to Castle Grendelmore. The golden spike is just that. It's a golden railway spike with various dwarven runes etched into it. He who holds the spike has the right to build the dwarven subrails. Mr. Stonecutter wants it to rebuild the subrails because the golden spike was lost while they were digging tunnels under the Orc lands, which is exactly where the party has to go now. Sneaking into this cave, killing a bunch of spiders, picking up a very cursed rock, picking up some very shiny amethyst rocks, and the video recording crapping out for both of the fights that happened during this part of the dungeon. The party succeeds though, and Stonecutter keeps his end of the bargain. The party even gets a tiger familiar out of the deal. Turns out Stonecutter is a bit of an eccentric and has a pet tiger on board the train, but understands that the tiger should be out and about and not holed up on an underground train. So the party adopts Mitzi and heads back to the airship, where Adeline finally has a plan to get her dad arrested. With details finally in place and a man on the inside, the party heads to Whitefall, capital of the human lands. It is also the largest city in Adia, built around an old ravine. It used to be a mining town. Now it's huge. It's also Relic's hometown, which he takes the lead showing the party around here. It's also here that Matthew drinks what is basically a quadruple shot espresso, which is keeping his character awake for 3 days. This is ongoing. The party meets up with Adeline's inside man at a cafe, who turns out is the butler, Reginald, right before the party is ambushed. Assassins swoop in and try to take the party out, but the party is able to repel the attack with the aid of Reginald, who turns out is a level 10 monk. They also learn that they need to break into Adeline's house to steal various receipts from an office on the top floor, because it turns out Adeline's father has been selling people to the country's enemies in Calderia, another country on this planet that's way overseas. The following night, the party breaks in and not only gets the receipts, but also proceeds to ransack the place. Scented candles, hats, trinkets, anything that isn't gonna get them spotted by the chef, who is viciously vomiting into a nearby plant. Due to various circumstances. Following this break-in, the party reports Adeline's father to the king himself. Now, the king is relatively young because the old king died during the Battle of the Gnome Lands, but that's neither here nor there. This evidence is deemed irrefutable, and Adeline's father is dragged away in chains, with the entire estate being passed over to Adeline herself. The party is thanked and finally comes up with their name, Stella Tenebra.